Dr. Gundry, everyone talks about the blue zones, especially since the Netflix documentary came out. Everyone says blue zones, that is the lifestyle/diet to follow if you want to live a long life with a lot of vitality. What's going on here? Do we have some holes to poke in that?
Yeah. So first of all, the concept of the blue zone actually occurred at a meeting in Montpellier, France, a number of years ago, where one particular researcher took out a map of the world and with a blue magic marker, blue felt tip pen, drew 5 blue circles in the 5 areas of the world that he thought people lived the longest. And who would be in the audience but the journalist Dan Buettner. Now, I've talked to Dan. Dan has a lot of important things to say. But like I write in Gut Check, Paul Simon used to sing, "A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest." And in research, a man sees what he wants to see and disregards the rest. So if I want to make a case that a vegan/vegetarian lifestyle equates with what I see in the blue zones, you could make superficially a pretty convincing case. But unfortunately, you're not seeing what is actually happening in these areas. We were talking off camera. Okinawa is one example. What's interesting, the actual Okinawan diet was only documented by the U.S. military right after the occupation forces took over Okinawa after World War II. And that's the only documentation of what the actual Okinawan diet was. And we'll get into that in a second. Now, all the birth records were destroyed with Allied bombing. And so when they started registering civilians, again, counting people, they asked them when they were born. And we don't know Japanese very well. And so what's remarkable is there were a huge number of people that were born in much the same year. And it was that recording of their guesstimate of when they were born that actually set the standard for these are long-living people.
Down below is a 25% off discount link for a premium mattress from Helix Sleep. Plus you get 2 free pillows. I've been using my Helix mattress for over 2 years. My wife and I love it. It's probably our favorite combined mattress because she's had different needs from me. She always likes a softer bed. I've liked a firmer bed. So Helix has this really cool sleep quiz that you take, and my wife takes as well. And it helped us determine exactly what mattress would be good for us. And we ended up settling on one of the Midnight Lux mattresses, which ended up being perfect for us. So again, that link at helixsleep.com/DeLauer gets you 25% off whatever mattress you choose, plus 2 free pillows. They're completely fiberglass free, so they don't have any of that weird hidden nastiness in them. There's also a 100-night sleep trial, so you can try it out, make sure it works for you. I'm pretty darn sure it will. And there's also a 10-year warranty as well. Now, personally, I'm a side sleeper, so it's always hard for me to find a mattress that doesn't make me feel kind of crumpled up and stiff in the morning. The nice thing about my particular Lux mattress is it works really well for me sleeping on my side. But there's other mattresses for stomach sleepers or back sleepers, you name it. It comes delivered completely rolled up, so it comes in a box, you take it into your room, you unpack it, you set it up. You don't have to like shuffle this mattress in through your hallways. It's not this like giant pain in the rear. And best of all, if you're in the United States, it's completely free shipping as well. So for 25% off and 2 free pillows, go to www.helixsleep.com/DeLauer.
But let's suppose the argument is that grains and beans are the secret to long life. Let's buy that for a second. Well, don't choose Okinawa, because the Okinawan diet was recorded by the U.S. military was 85% sweet potatoes, a purple sweet potato. Why did they do that? Well, it was actually imported from China several hundred years earlier because they couldn't grow rice on Okinawa because the storms prevented rice from being. So the Okinawans eat sweet potatoes. They don't eat rice like everybody else does. They can't grow it. They don't eat soy. They don't eat tofu. They have miso and natto, which is fermented soy, but they don't eat soy. So grains and beans basically don't exist in one of the blue zones. Now, what they do is they have lots of spicy vegetables, lots of bitter greens. In fact, in the rest of Japan, the Okinawans are called the spice eaters. And it's all these polyphenols and all these bitter greens that actually help give them longevity. Plus, if you want to keep a great microbiome, a sweet potato is a pretty doggone good thing. So much for that. Now, my favorite is actually Sardinia. And the Sardinians are a really great case in point of how to avoid the obvious. First of all, Sardinia is an island off the coast of Italy. It's part of Italy. There's essentially two populations. Some live down by the sea. They're mostly fishermen. Others live up in the mountainous areas. They're mainly sheep and goat herders. They do eat a buckwheat bread, but interestingly, the folks up in the mountains have the longevity. The folks down by the water don't have longevity. And when you break down where the longevity comes in the mountainous areas, the men, 99% of the men smoke, and only 25% of the females smoke. The men exceed the female lifespan. So normally, men live 6 to 7 years shorter lives than women. Women are definitely the stronger sex. But on Sardinia, the smoking men actually have the longevity. And it's the nicotine in the smoke that actually promotes their longevity. Now, the other thing that's different is that these are sheep and goat herders, and they eat a huge amount of pecorino cheese from sheep and a huge amount of sheep and goat yogurts. And my friend Mark Hyman, who took a group to visit them, came back and said, "You're not going to believe this. These guys eat yogurt, all day long. Well, that has nothing to do with the blue zones." Well, because you can't see it if that's not what you're looking for. So it wasn't the breads or the beans. They don't eat beans. It was the smoking and the sheep cheeses and yogurts that gave them their longevity.
So you look at, and compared to the rest of the Mediterranean, and and this is honest gospel truth. I filmed a video last week specifically on Sardinia. It's weird that we're even talking about this because I found it fascinating too. And one of the other things I saw is that most of the Mediterranean regions consume about 60% carbohydrates. Sardinia is about 35%.
Yeah.
So out of all the Mediterranean regions, they seem to eat the lowest amount of overall carbohydrates. I'm not saying the carbohydrates are bad.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that, you look at that. And also, of course, which I found very interesting because I'm pretty opposed to alcohol, but they drink a fair bit of that Cannonau wine as well.
Has one of the highest levels of polyphenols ever recorded in wine. Plus, the higher the altitude that grapes are grown, the more polyphenols it has.
Interesting. Is that sort of I know you're not a viticulturist, but does it have something to do with like the hypoxia, just like less oxygen makes they develop more polyphenols as a protective mechanism, or what is it?
Well, no, the closer it gets to sunlight, and I wrote about this in the last book, polyphenols are used by plants to protect their mitochondrial equivalent, which are called chloroplasts, from UV light damage, from photon damage. And they use polyphenols to uncouple their mitochondria, and we won't go down that road. So the higher up there, or the more stressed they are, the more polyphenols they put in. I make an olive oil that has 30 times more polyphenols than any other olive oil in the world because the farmer who devised it planted his olive trees very close together in rocky soil in the Moroccan desert in a high elevation in the Atlas Mountains because he wanted to duplicate what he thought was the vintner's thing, and he was absolutely right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyhow, yeah. So, and look at Acciaroli, south of Naples, where I visited. the highest amount of centenarians per population of any town. The town only has about 1,000 people. 300 of those people are over the age of 100. Not bad.
Not bad at all.
And they've been studied extensively by cardiologists out of San Diego. And one of the interesting things is, first of all, these guys eat a lot of anchovies, and they do not eat bread. They do not eat pasta because long ago they couldn't afford it. They do eat lentils, so that's the source of their carbohydrate. They have a lot of olive oil. They have a lot of wine. But the unique thing about their diet is, number one, the absence of carbohydrates, those healthy grain products, and they chew and eat a lot of rosemary. And rosemary has some fascinating compounds, ursolaic acid, rosmarinic acid, that have, among other things, been shown to increase brain health, but even more than that, they're an aphrodisiac. And one of the interesting findings of the researchers is the old men are really horny. So again, here's another longevity capital of the world that failed to meet the criteria of health. And, I'm the only nutritionist who's actually spent most of my career living in a blue zone, Loma Linda, California. And Loma Linda, the Adventist diet, and the Adventists do have the longevity within Loma Linda. There's nothing unique about Loma Linda, the city, for longevity. In fact, they don't even rank. But the Adventists do very well. Now, the Adventists, 50% of their diet is fat, primarily from dairy and eggs. 50%. In fact, when I got there, when I was recruited as chairman of heart surgery there, I accused the dietitians of trying to kill my heart surgery patients because all they were feeding them was cheeses and yogurts and eggs with cheese on it. And I said, you can't do that. It's full of cholesterol. And they said, Sonny, just shut up. We know what we're doing here. The Adventists don't eat soy. What they eat is texturized vegetable protein, TVP. How do you make that? We called it mystery meat. It's actually defatted soy that's extruded under high temperature and pressure to make this funky meat. So they've basically pressure cooked their soy and defatted it so that they don't eat tofu and soy. They eat pressurized. And pressure cooking destroys most of the lectins in food. So it's like, wow, these guys are pretty doggone smart. How'd they do that? And so I'm sorry, they don't follow Dan Buettner's diet.
Interesting. So they're, given that they're in California, California is one of the few states where we can buy raw milk. Is the dairy that they consume, are they predominantly consuming raw dairy?
No, they ferment their dairy. And again, I also lived in Wisconsin, the dairy state. Raw dairy carries the same problem of any dairy, and that is it's loaded with this sugar molecule called Nu-5-GC. And, I've preached against Nu-5-GC for a long time, and I preach even harder in Gut Check. But if you ferment dairy, then you get rid of Nu-5-GC. The bacteria eat it. They love Nu-5-GC. So, for instance, Parmesan cheese, which is a raw cheese, has no Nu-5-GC in it, but the milk from the cows that go into it is loaded with Nu-5-GC.
So in terms of cheeses, what would you recommend? Like Parmesan, Pecorino Romano?
So most people, kind of fun fact, MCT oil and MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, all carry the name of the Latin word for goat, capra. So caprylic acid, caproic acid, all named for goat. Why? It turns out that goat and sheep, 30% of all the fat in that milk is medium chain triglycerides. And isn't it interesting that the longest living people in the world are goat and sheep herders? In fact, on So Sardinia, they're goat and sheep herders. Icaria, they're goat and sheep herders. Andorra, the longest longevity of any country, they're goat and sheep herders. Even the Nagoyan Peninsula of Costa Rica, the unique thing about the Nagoyan Peninsula is that they're goat and sheep herders, and none of the rest of Costa Rica is. And there's some papers, which I cite in Gut Check, showing that the corn and beans that they do eat are a negative part of their diet that's compensated for by the sheep and goat milk products that they eat.
Interesting.
And in fact, again, we look at it, I think, the wrong way. We're always looking for something that confirms our belief system. So if my belief system is that grains and beans are really healthy for you, I'll look for things that confirm that. But Stefan Lundeberg, who is a researcher out of Scandinavia, spent his life researching food and Western diseases. And one of the things that he wrote about was, I want you to look the other way. Suppose grains and beans are a negative aspect of a diet that's compensated for by all the other positive aspects of the diet, like olive oil, like polyphenols in fruits and vegetables, like wine and its polyphenol content, and that you're compensating for those negative aspects. It's the same way with smoking. We've always said, wow, isn't it interesting that all these long-living people smoke? And they, despite the fact that we know smoking is so bad for you, must be that all the rest of their diet compensates for that bad habit. Well, what if we looked at it the other direction? What is it about all these long-lived people that they're smokers? What is it about nicotine that gives them a benefit? For instance, if you look at the British physician study, 60,000 British physicians tracked throughout their life, the smokers had a 30% less incidence of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's than the non-smokers.
Interesting. And here we are, we bag on smoking, yet we no problem being sedentary.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Please don't smoke.
Yeah. So when we were talking off camera a little bit about certain cities that have like a higher life expectancy or longer life expectancy. I mentioned Hong Kong, which is up there, which is interesting because it's like, it's interesting thing about Hong Kong is they eat kind of everything, right? But they're kind of like, but then you said actually the number one city was what?
Yeah, actually Monte Carlo.
Nice.
Yeah, Monaco. And it's also one of the richest cities in the world. And there is arguably a debate, okay, well, why are they so long-lived? Maybe being rich is good for you. And one of our good friends argues that the reason they live so long is their healthcare is spectacularly good. Well, if healthcare was the predictor of long-lived people, then we ought to be the longest living people in the world because we have, quote, the best healthcare in the world, certainly the most expensive, and we don't even rank anywhere near these long-lived societies. So it's not the access to good healthcare.
Yeah, it's funny, and we probably have the graphic we can show on screen from another video that we did. It was the one where we did the Europe versus America, and there's actually a chart that shows like longevity, like the actual the life expectancy over the amount of money spent on healthcare, and on the x-axis it was how much money is spent. The United States was far right, as far as you can go, spending the most, and as far as longevity was concerned, it was down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And it was like, you've got some of these others that spend not that much on healthcare, and they're way up the top. Then you've got some like Mexico that were like, we don't spend much on healthcare and low life expectancy, but that's where you start factoring in socio-demographic, other things like that, crime. And it's just interesting because it's not always healthcare related. Like I'm sure that is a phenomenal Band-Aid. And also there are situations where Western medicine is phenomenal. But what do you think it is about Monaco? Is it the F1 race?
Well, yeah, maybe it's that. First of all, they're basically all of that area was once part of Italy, all the way over to Nice. And they follow really an Italian diet. What's interesting, I once got to speak with the Minister of Health for both France and Italy, and got into olive oil. If you track where olives can grow in the Mediterranean, that longevity actually tracks the level of where olive trees can grow. And there's a really interesting demarcation across Europe. Now, many people argue, well, then it's the olive oil that these people use. And while that may be true, the Minister of Nutrition in Italy said, look, oleic acid and olive oil isn't that particularly interesting substance. It's what the polyphenol content of the olive oil that makes the difference. And that, we now know, has dramatic health benefits. The other thing that the French minister pointed out to me, he says, if you track where olive trees can grow, it actually correlates to the amount of sunlight that's available. And that sun exposure and vitamin D levels may be one of the best determinants for longevity. And I write a lot about that in Gut Check, and I certainly agree that vitamin D levels may be one of the biggest factors in longevity. And I think it explains why so many of these blue zones, and I think we ought to call them white zones, track in the high sunlight areas.
So if you had to, and this can be purely your opinion, doesn't have to be rooted in any particular literature, if you sort of had to pick different components of the different regions that live the longest, what would you assemble to craft what you would consider the optimal longevity protocol or diet based upon different regions?
Well, I kid people that the only purpose of food is to get olive oil into your mouth. And I stand by that. But what's interesting is that some of my toughest patients who have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, I basically tell them, look, I want you to be a gorilla who lives in Italy. And they look at me funny and they said, I want you to eat a lot of leaves and I want you to pour olive oil on it. And if you do that, you watch what happens. Now, I've amended that in that there's another oil that I think is equal or maybe superior to olive oil that most people have never heard about, but I've been writing about it for a while. It's called perilla oil. Perilla oil is the number one oil of Korea and most of China. And it's made from perilla seeds. What the heck is a perilla? Most of us in America know it as a coleus plant, the pretty leaved plants that we often have growing in our gardens or even as a house plant. Those bear little seeds and perilla oil. Now, what's so cool about perilla oil? It's almost pure alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, the short-chain omega-3 fat. Why is that so important? Well, there's a very famous study called the Lyon Heart Diet study where people with known coronary artery disease were randomized to the American Heart Association low-fat diet versus a Mediterranean diet that was supplemented with a margarine made out of rapeseed oil, which is essentially canola oil, which is mostly alpha-linolenic acid, ALA. The study was supposed to go for 5 years. It was stopped at 3 years because the group that got the rapeseed margarine had such improved outcomes that it was unethical to continue the study. They did so much better. When they looked at all the data, looked at every factor in those diets, the only differential that made the difference between the two diets was the level of alpha-linolenic acid in their diet. That was the only one. And as I write about in this book, it correlates extremely well with blood vessel health, and it correlates with preventing little pieces of, better known as LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, from getting out of your gut.
Wild.
Yeah.
So this particular Korean oil, I mean, obviously going to be better than margarine. I mean, I'm sure we could find flaws in margarine when it comes.
Well,
to
this wasn't margarine. It was margarine made out of rapeseed oil.
Got it. Yeah. So you're not having the trans fats. I mean, it's like so. And with rapeseed, obviously, there's different levels of probably refining and deodorants and whatnot. So with this particular oil, you're talking about it in a more wholesome form.
Yeah, it's organic and it's available. You can actually find it. I use about half perilla oil and half olive oil in all my salad dressings and all my cooking. And I think it's that important.
With Sardinia, I know there's a weird oil there, mastic oil.
Yeah, mastic oil.
It's a pretty high oleic acid content.
Yep.
It's probably not as high polyphenol, I'd imagine, because it's coming from like essentially just the tree. It's not coming from a fruit or anything that's going to, or a vegetable that's going to have a high polyphenol content. Am I mistaken?
That's correct. Yeah.
So it's just a good fatty acid profile.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Gundry, where can everyone find your new book and where can they find you online?
So the book, anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target, you name it, go to your local bookseller, please. They need our help. The book will be there. If not, you can order it. They'll get it in for you quickly. You can find me at drgundry.com. You can find my food and supplement company at gundrymd.com, the Dr. Gundry podcast, and my 2 YouTube channels. And hopefully, most of your listeners see me waving at them every morning as they're scrolling through their whatever they like to look at on their phone.
Well, beautiful. Well, Dr. Gundry, thank you so much, my man. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.